much all about the books that I've read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He is a business law attorney, no other than Mr. Matthew Fornaro.
Good afternoon, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Matthew. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure, my name's Matthew Fornaro. I'm a business law attorney. I'm located here in Florida. I've been an attorney for 23 years, and my practice focuses on helping small and medium sized businesses with their litigation and transaction needs.
Mr. Matthew Fornaro, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world as well as your wisdom too. And today, let's talk about solutions for small business owners. Beyond obvious issues like cash flow, what are the most common legal pitfalls that unexpectedly derail small businesses?
Sure, it starts with the inception of the business. People are really excited to get into business, so they don't really take the necessary steps that they need to set up the business, no matter where they're located. So it's doing the due diligence. The first thing you have to do is have a written business plan before you even start the business, which is your outline of how you're going to run the business, what your goals are, who you're going to do business with, how you're going to get money, how you're going to spend money. All that stuff has to be in a written business plan. So that's a good way to avoid issues, is having that in place before you even start. Then once you start, you have to make sure that you register your business with whatever local entity that it needs to be registered with. And you have to make sure that you have governing documents for your business. So if you're a corporation, you have articles of incorporation and bylaws. If you're an LLC, you have an operating agreement. If you're a partnership, you have a partnership agreement, and so on. So those are the biggest hurdles or biggest issues just to get into business, is making sure that you do the due diligence and have the paperwork prepared. From there on, it's the usual ebbs and flows of just the business being the business, doing the work, trying to make it successful, and all the other things that you encounter.
What are the biggest mistakes you see entrepreneurs make when choosing their business structures?
An entrepreneur, when you're getting into business, obviously you're probably not doing it as a hobby, you're doing it as a way to make money and try to build something. So what you want to do is make sure that you have a team of professionals that you can rely on and count on to get information from. So you want to have a business law attorney, you want to have an accountant, you want to have a banker, and you want to be able to call on those people for their expertise to help you out. So before you even pick a business organization, you should consult with an attorney, an accountant, a banker, find out based on your specific situation and your needs what kind of business organization is best for you, and then pick that business organization, and that's what you go with, rather than just jump into something because you saw it on the internet, because someone else has that kind of business organization. You have to make sure that it's tailored for you and what your goals are in the business.
Very well said, Mr. Matthew. Very well said. Where do small businesses most often go wrong in their customer vendor contracts? Is it vague scope or weak termination clauses or something else?
Well, one of the main things is that they don't have a contract to begin with. So that's one of the main issues, is that they just kind of operate on a handshake, send out invoices, and hope to get paid. So any contract is better than no contract. But then again, when you get your contract, you want to make sure that it has all the necessary terms for what you're doing. You want to make sure that it clearly says who does what, when, where, why, how you get paid, when you get paid, what to do if there's a dispute, where to go if there's a dispute. Make sure it has an attorney's fees provision and things like that. And if you want to go to like arbitration as opposed to litigation, have an arbitration provision or have a mediation provision or something like that. So a lot of people just have boilerplate contracts that have either the bare minimum or less than the bare minimum. And that's not going to work because when you have a situation that arises, you want to make sure you have the most robust, proper contract. And that's why you have to put in the effort and like do, like I just said, when you put your contracts together.
Mr. Matthew, why do I need contract? We trust each other. What is your most cautionary tale about relying on verbal agreements?
Sure. As much as I'd love to believe the next guy, and, I think we're both in business to make money and do what's right, issues arise. There's a dispute as to what we agreed upon. There's a dispute as to what I'm supposed to give you, what you're supposed to give me, what I'm supposed to pay you, what you're supposed to pay me. And if you don't have written terms, you're going to have issues as far as buying and selling things, or if you're renting a property, the terms of renting the property, or if you're going to buy a property, the terms of buying the property. That's why contracts are essential. I've had over 2 decades of experience of, hundreds, if not thousands at this point, of situations where bad things have happened because good contracts weren't in place. I mean, people lost a lot of money, people have lost property, people have, had really bad things happen to them because they don't have contracts. And that's why it's essential to A, have a contract, and B, have a good contract.
What's the single biggest misconception small businesses have about classifying workers that triggers IRS state audit?
Sure. And this is why, like I was talking about earlier in our segment, you want to work with not only an attorney, but you want to work with an accountant as well. What happens is a lot of businesses try to, get around paying taxes as much as possible. And they try to categorize everyone, at least here in the US, as a 1099 independent contractor as opposed to a W 2 employee. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, it gets really bad because you're not only going to owe the employee the money, you're going to owe local, state, and federal governments unpaid tax money and unpaid employment fees and things like that. So that's why, as much as you want to try to save money or do whatever, you really have to categorize who works for you as what they work for. If they are there every day, if they have a specific set amount of goals, if they have a specific amount of time, if they're full time, whatever, they're a W 2 employee. You can't characterize them as a 1099 independent contractor. If they have the ability to work for other people and not just you, if they can go around and freelance or something like that, then they're a 1099 independent contractor. They're not a W 2 employee. So it's important that as much as it's painful or you think it's painful to pay withholding taxes and all the things that go with a W 2 employee, you need to categorize them correctly because if and when something bad happens, not only are you going to owe money to the employee for not paying them correctly, you're going to owe a lot of money to the government and it's not going to turn out well. And I've seen it not turn out well many times.
For small businesses with limited IT resources, what are the absolute minimum legal compliance steps they must take regarding data privacy and breach response?
Sure. Obviously, securing your client's data and your own data is a major, uh, necessity in business these days, particularly if you're processing payments, if you're receiving payments, if you're receiving confidential information via email. So you want to make sure that at an absolute minimum, you have a secure online system to send and receive payments that has, like SSL security certificates, 32-bit plus encryption, all of that, stuff that's pretty much commonplace now, but you want to make sure it's there. You want to make sure you use like two-factor authentication. You ought to make sure that you don't email people confidential information unless it's an encrypted email. You don't just send a regular Outlook email to someone like that. So that's the bare minimum you need to have in place. And you really should have, as part of your written business plan, a policy on data security. And you got to make sure you implement it. And it's really not hard. Most of the programs have the security built into them these days. You just have to implement them and use them.
Mr. Matthew, what hidden legal risks lurk in a small businesses' online presence, like accessibility, user reviews, or copyright violations in images?
Sure. When you're in business now, you have to be on the internet. You have to have a web presence. You have to have a social media presence. You have to have a presence on different apps and different platforms. So the problem is, when you put yourself out there, you're opening yourself up to issues of, like I just talked about in the last segment, payments or data transfer, payment issues, things like that. So that's one of the issues that you're opening yourself up for when you're out on the internet. Another issue is obviously, like copyright infringement. You have to make sure that all the information, all the content you put on your website, you're able to do and is not someone else's property. So, for instance, on a regular website like my website, I use stock photos that are uh, licensed or in the public domain. So I'm paying whoever owns those photos to use them, or I'm using public domain photos. I'm not going onto someone's website, ripping off a picture and putting it on my website, or vice versa. And if you do that and you get caught, you're in for trouble because you're going to get hit with a copyright lawsuit. And I've represented a few clients over the years who've been hit with that. Same thing with trademarks. You can't put someone else's trademarked uh, material on your website unless you have the rights to do it or you have a license to do it. So you want to make sure that your web presence is, um, secure for all the data and for information things and stuff like that, and make sure that the content on there, you're allowed to use it, and you have licenses, you have public domain, you have things that you can put on there, and that you're not infringing on someone else's rights or something like that. And then another thing too is, you pointed out, like online reviews and stuff like that. That's a whole nother facet of issues that you have being online, is online reviews, online issues of, I got a bad review or something like that. You have to be very careful with that, because you, for instance, as an attorney, if someone leaves a bad review, I can't go on and refute it and say things that are involved in the attorney client relationship, because that's a ethics violation with the bar. So someone may put on some one-sided story about how bad I am and I did this and that. I can't refute it because I'm not allowed to. There's other regulated industries like that you're not allowed to do that. For instance, if you're in financial transactions, you can't talk about certain money things. Accountants, you can't talk about certain money things. You have to make sure that, if you receive a bad review and you want to do something about it, you put a response on there that is, gets the point across, but is not violating any confidentiality or any kind of privacy issues with your former client, because you still owe them some kind of duty of privacy. So it's an ongoing issue that, changes all the time. But, with the online reviews, if you get a bad review, some maybe it's best to ignore it and just go on to the next one. Or if not, you want to make sure you give a totally generic uh, explanation that doesn't violate any privacy or privilege issues.
Definitely. Better let it go, people. Let it go. And Mr. Matthew, as a business law attorney, what are your short term and long term goals?
Well, my short term and long term goals are obviously for my business. It's to continue to do good work and, meet my clients' expectations and continue to grow my business, which is both short term and long term goals. I like my business right now where I am as far as a sole practitioner. I don't want to expand outside of being a sole practitioner, particularly because I have all the tools I need to be successful. I just want to keep growing my business each year and keep integrating more and more technology into my business in order to make me more efficient.
Good luck to your goals, Mr. Matthew, and looking forward for more success. And what will be your piece of advice for those small business owners out there?
Is to make sure you always have a plan in place and make sure you have people around you who can help you, like the professionals that I mentioned, or family members or friends or colleagues or whatever. Make sure you surround yourself with people who can help you. Make sure you have a written plan and make sure that you execute on that plan and make sure you believe in yourself.
Believe in yourself, people, that you can do it. For sure, you can do it. And Mr. Matthew, can you recommend a book that influenced your journey?
Yes, I would recommend any book by Dale Carnegie. I'm really into Dale Carnegie. He's a really, um, or he was, I should say, he was a really powerful person at self realization, self motivation, and actualization. So you got to go with the his best book, his most popular book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and follow it because it's great. It applies to business, it applies to life, it applies to friendships, it applies to relationships, it applies to everything.
Indeed, people, highly recommended. And Mr. Matthew, why do so many small businesses neglect succession planning, and what's the bare minimum legal step they should take now?
Sure. So it goes back to the whole thing of people are excited to get into business and don't really plan ahead when something happens, or you want to something happens to you and you're not in the business anymore, you want to sell the business, or you want to bring people into the business or whatever. So you want to make sure that when you start your business and you start with the governing documents, you make sure that those governing documents have in there how you sell the business, how you give the business away, how you bring people into the business, how you make people leave the business if you need to make someone leave, and make sure that's all in your documents. So then that way, when there's an issue, you just go to your documents and follow the steps. And then that way, if something happens to you and there needs to be a succession, it's written down. It says exactly what needs to happen. If you need to sell the business, it's written down. It says exactly what needs to happen. So at the inception, make sure that's in your governing documents.
When is using online legal templates or DIY legal services a major gamble for a small business?
It's always a gamble with a small business because, like I say, the correct answer to anything is on the internet. However, the incorrect answer to anything is also on the internet, and you can't tell which is which if you're not a person who is in that field. So you can find all kinds of templates, you can find all kinds of things on the internet. You just don't know if they're right or not. So as a business, you want to make sure that in your budget and in your plan, you have a attorney as part of your business process. So then that way they can draft your contracts, they can review your contracts, and so you don't have to guess as to what's right or what's wrong and take risks of looking for templates on the internet. If you're really on a shoestring or if you really can't afford it, then the online legal services are better than just doing something on Google. But obviously, the attorney is better than the online legal services. So, at a minimum, use the online legal service if you can't afford an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, use an attorney because I guarantee you, like I said, the right answer is out there, but so is the wrong answer. You're not going to know which one is which.
Mr. Matthew, what sales tax, shipping, or consumer protection rules trip up small businesses selling online, especially across state lines?
Sure. So one of the things you need to know, and this is why you need to have an accountant on board as part of your team too, in addition to an attorney, is what taxes you're paying. Because you may be located in one state, the person you're selling to is located in another state or country for that matter, and the tax man wants their money. So you have to understand that if you're buying and selling like where I am in Florida, there's 7% sales tax. If you're operating in another jurisdiction, you have to understand what the sales tax is there. And you have to make sure you withhold that tax and actually pay that tax to the state government. Also, dealing with international transactions, just the VAT, you have to make sure you pay the correct VAT depending on where you are internationally. And that's something that is on a case by case basis that if you're not set up properly to do, you're going to have problems. And fortunately, for most online retailers now, your payment processing company or the company that you run your credit cards with or you run your ACH or transfers through does it for you because they know, like, for instance, the buyers in New York, the sellers in Florida, it's a Florida 7% sales tax. They'll put that in automatically. So technology is kind of helping out the business person in order to avoid that. But as the business person, you need to be aware of what your sales tax is where you're operating.
Very well said, Mr. Matthew. Very well said. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, which is Mental Health 101. Please do listen, Mental Health 101, because it's created to empower our mental health awareness. And Mr. Matthew, if you could get very small business owner to do one preventative legal action this year, what would have it be?
It would be have your written business plan and have your governing documents, and you're going to avoid a lot of problems.
Yes, indeed. And Mr. Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy as well as your business itself?
Sure, Daniel, thanks. If you want to reach me or get a hold of me, I'm all over social media, but the easiest way to get a hold of me is to go to my website, which is fornarolegal.com, which is FORNARO legal.com. And it has all my contact information, my phone number, my email, and all my social media. And it's got a bunch of content that's pretty good for business owners to look at.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Matthew Fornaro because if you support him, more and more and more empowering business will come. So, Mr. Matthew, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Daniel. I appreciate it.
Modicon people, see you soon.